My Name is America, the Journal of James Edmond Pease, a Civil War Union Soldier, by Jim Murphy. Virginia, 1863. I have been told to keep a record of what we do, though I do not know why I was picked. I am not the best at spelling. Kerper, Corporal Bell is. I am not the smartest either. Osgood Tracy is the smartest in the company. That is why we call him Little Professor. And we are doing exactly what we have been doing for some days now, marching around and getting nowhere. Besides, keeping this record has already been the death of 2 good men, and I don't need more bad luck on my head. Well, you have read it all. Lieutenant Toms looked over what I wrote and said I had got it all wrong and to do it again. Put in details, he said. So I will. Lieutenant Alexander Toms has ordered me to keep an accurate and honest account of G Company of the 122nd Regiment, New York Volunteers, from Onondaga County in New York State. Lieutenant Toms is keeping his own account and will combine it with this at the end of the war to make a true and fair history of our brave men and their courageous deeds. That is exactly his words. I do not see why I have to keep this record when I know it will be my death. Lieutenant Tom said to stop complaining like a greenhorn recruit. He said I was chosen because he can read my handwriting easier than most. He also said there is no curse to keeping this journal, and that he is pretty certain I will last to the end of this war to finish it, unlike the first 2. You are not one of those crazy patriot fools who sticks his head up high to show how brave you are, he said. When we come under fire, you hug the ground like a baby hugs its mother's teat. I want it clear that I am as good a soldier as any in G Company, and have a torn-up arm and a black tooth to prove it. Lieutenant Tom said what I wrote was better, but was still missing some important details. When I talked back fresh and said, "But I put your name in as many times as I could, sir," he said I could sit apart and miss dinner till I know what I left out. That is hard to do because we had scared up some hens who are now in a pot with some turnips and an onion, and the smell makes my head swim. What I remember is that last month, which was October, we left Warrenton Junction and went north to Bristow Station, then on to Centerville, all in Virginia, to head off the Rebs, who was trying to get at the national capital in Washington. The fighting was hot, but we saw little of it, as we was assigned to protect the rear of the supply train as usual. Our army pushed the Rebs back, and then we followed them south, and are today close by Rappahannock Station, still in the Circassa land of Virginia. So marching has been our work and entertainment now for almost 20 days. I will add only that the first keeper of this journal was killed on the march to Gettysburg by a runaway wagon. The second died at the hands of a sharpshooter on a very peaceful Sabbath, the only shot fired that day that I recall, and the only man killed in the army. What else is there to say? Lieutenant Tom said there was more to say, and that I should think carefully and fully. But how can I, when all around me is the smell of chicken and the sound of smacking lips? I will try this. G Company is 42 strong today, plus 1 3-legged dog and 1 Negro camp servant. We have had 9 desertions since Gettysburg, so tomorrow there may be fewer. It is November 5th, 1863. I did not show this to the lieutenant. Instead, I asked the little professor to read it, and he did, but he could not talk because his mouth was full. He did point to a written I, and when I looked puzzled, he pointed to me. I am not as bright as some, but I am not an empty barrel either. So I will write, my name is James Edmond Pease. I am a private in the United States Army of the Potomac, which is under the command of General George Meade, and I am 16 years old, I think, or thereabouts. I showed this to Lieutenant Toms, and he smiled and said, "Pull up a log, Private Pease. While you sup, I will tell you some other things I would like in the journal." And that is what I am going to do, though there is mighty little chicken left to sup on. November 6th. Lieutenant Tom's first bit of advice was, start with the date and the rest will follow naturally. so I have given the date, and will add that we was up at 5 this morning, marching by 6, with only hardtack biscuits and a tin of coffee in between. The coffee had to be as old as Colonel Titus himself, and tasted like the inside of a boot with the foot still inside. But since it was an improvement over yesterday's coffee, I'm not complaining. Once again, our orders from regimental headquarters are to guard the rear of the supply train. This is as good a job as any to me, but it does not sit well with the rest of the men, who are eager to see some fighting. And once again Lieutenant Toms has sent Willie Dodd and his dog Spirit with a request that we be allowed to join up with the rest of the 122nd at the forward line of the battle at noon the same day. The answer to Lieutenant Tom's request was no, as it has been every day since Gettysburg. I did sigh with relief when I heard this, but I also know that my bad luck can follow me into a church if it wants, so there is no relaxing for me. After this we marched along for 4 miles in a cold drizzle that has left us damp and cranky, me especially, since I am sure every Reb sharpshooter has me as a target. Even Johnny Henderson, who usually has a smile painted on his face, said he would bite the ear off any man or beast who looked cross-eyed at him. Charlie Shelp said Johnny was just missing his mama again. So Johnny went at him, and the two rolled around on the ground, fists and mud flying and cussing and such, with the rest of the company and several of the mule drivers looking on. I may be mistaken, but I believe the company's sentiment was with Johnny, as Charlie has offended almost everyone with his mouth. He did me when he started calling me orphan boy. One of the officers of the supply train, Major Mitchell, rode up just as Lieutenant Toms was pulling the two apart. The major told Johnny and Charlie to save your fight for the rebels, but it was Lieutenant Tom who answered, "We are saving it, but guarding a mule's ass is not our notion of a fight." Major Mitchell looked as if he had drunk bad milk, and said, "Lieutenant Toms, if anyone would have you, I would be happy to see you get your wish," and then rode off. How is it that when Lieutenant Toms talk back nothing happens to him, but when I do I get to sit aside and watch everyone else eat? And he did not even say "sir" that I heard. 3 o'clock. The supply train has been stopped a while, so I will do some writing as instructed. Lieutenant Toms wants me to do a list of all the men in our company, being careful to give their proper ages and spell all names correctly. This is not such a hard task, since our company is down considerable from its original 97 men and 3 officers. Here are those left. Lieutenant Alexander Toms, 43. Sergeant Robert Donahue, 26. Corporal John Bell, 21. Corporal Philip Drake, 22. Private James Pease, 16. Private John Keller, 22. Private Develio Stevens, 17. Private Philo Olmsted, 35. Private Charles Holman, 37. Private William Bateman, 18. Private Charlie Shelp, 25. Private Lyman Swim, 17. Private Hiram Wicks, 29. Private Chester Youngs, 21. Private Cornelius Mihar, 20. Private Miles McGow, 22. Private John Williams, 31. Private Henry Clements, 18. Private George Chittenden, 29. Private Alonzo Clute, 20. Private John Doty, 35. Private Miles Gorham, 21. Private Will Hammond, 17. Private Joseph Lanphier, 34. Private David Bernard, 20. Private Charles Stevens, 31. Private William Kittler, 26. Private James Crozier, 21. Private Benjamin Breed, 21. Private Niles Rogers, 34. Private Theodore Stevens, 16. Private Osgood Tracy, 21. Private William Zellers, 30. Private Jehiel Lamphere, 44. Private Peter McDade, 17. Private Stanford Van Dyke, 18. Private Henry Wyatt, 17. Private Hiram Woolsey, 20. Private James Wyatt, 20. Private Brower Davis, 19. Private John Farner, 44. Private Boswell Grant, 38. Private Johnny Henderson, 19. Private Willie Dodd, 16. And Spirit, 3. We have no captain, since Lieutenant Toms was reduced in rank, no second lieutenant, since Harrison Gilson died of typhus fever, and no third lieutenant, since Ernst Atgelt was transferred to K Company after all their officers was killed. Lieutenant Toms has a Negro servant named Caesar, who was freed from a house here in Virginia and works for his keep. He does not know how old he is, but Lieutenant Toms guesses he might be as old as 50. That is all of them, every one, unless one is in the woods on a call of nature and I have forgotten him. Same day, near dark. Skirmish fire off to our right a mile or so. Firing came on very suddenly and is very hot. We are so used to hearing cannon and musket fire that we hardly notice it any more. But this time it sounded sharper to me, and I got goose flesh when I knew it was getting closer. Lieutenant Toms thinks the Rebs are driving in our guard pickets and told us to load our muskets and form a line along the road to face the oncoming sound. Everyone, including Lieutenant Toms, looks nervous. "Hold your fire, boys. Hold your fire," Lieutenant Toms is barking out louder than he needs to. "Hold your fire till I give the command." The lieutenant and some others may be recalling Gettysburg, but I think most of the men are nervous because we was issued only 5 rounds of ammunition today, ammunition being in short supply, and 5 rounds will not last but a breath or two in a good fight. Lieutenant Toms has just screamed, "What the devil are you doing, Pease?" And I told him I was making an accurate and honest account of the fight as ordered, sir. "Load your damned musket and find a place in line," he ordered very loudly, which I will do now. Later. It turned out to be all noise and excitement and nothing more for us, which is fine, since I am not eager to add my blood to the cover of this book, not for $13 a month, which we haven't seen in 3 months anyway. The fighting came very close, maybe a half-mile off, and went on for several minutes. We could hear the popping of muskets talking to each other, and even smelled the burnt-up powder drifting through the trees. But it is very hilly in here, so we did not see anything at all, even with most of the leaves gone. Major Mitchell rode up and told Lieutenant Toms to take us out a quarter mile from the road and form another line of defense there. We was to hold off the enemy while he moved his wagons to a safer spot. We responded instantly, but had only got a few steps when Major Mitchell called out, "And Lieutenant Toms, do not fire till you see the enemy clearly. Do you understand?" Lieutenant Toms said, "Yes, sir," but I could see he wanted to say more, and so did the rest of us. What happened at Gettysburg was a mistake. A terrible mistake, but an honest one. The smoke from thousands of muskets and the hours-long cannon duel was choking thick and blinding. I know, because I was behind our breastworks of cut saplings, and I saw the hazy silhouettes of men coming up the hill, dark, ghost-like shapes without definition, and, I might add, without a regimental flag either. What I did see plainly was that they were firing at us, just like any good Reb would. I hadn't been in many fights before Gettysburg. None of us had. And I wasn't a very good shot either. I just pulled the trigger and hoped to hit a tree or something close enough to a Reb to scare him off. They was the enemy, but I figured that if they didn't try to hurt me, I didn't have to hurt them. But something happened at Gettysburg that changed that. First, like a fool, I stuck my head up to see what the Rebs was up to, and saw those soldiers coming at us. Before I had a chance to get down behind cover, a Minnie ball ripped into my arm. It wasn't bad, just a grazing, but it burned as hot as a poker. Then, while I was sitting there looking at my arm and a little bit of blood that was oozing out, a shell exploded above us, and I got hit in the mouth by a piece of flying iron. I was so mad I jumped up and fired back, this time taking better aim. The rest of the company fired at those advancing figures too, till we had silenced those guns, every one of them. It was what we had been told and taught to do, after all, and no one who was there would ever have blamed us. We never knew they was Union soldiers till it was all over. Only the officers at headquarters wasn't there, and did not understand how we could fight our own men when they was so close. They said our company had panicked because it was our first real fight, and that Lieutenant Toms had failed to control us, which is just not true. Neither one. No one believed Lieutenant Tom's story, and all the other officers who had been near us and could have told the truth was either dead or wounded. Of course, I blame myself for some of what happened to the lieutenant, me being unlucky and all from birth. That is why we all wanted to say something to Major Mitchell, but no one did. We know better than to do that when there is a real fight going on. Instead, we went out to welcome the Rebs, and I think we was all in a mood for a good fight. Even me. But before we got very far, there was a ferocious volley of musketry up ahead, followed by a loud cheer. "Those will be our reinforcements," Lieutenant Tom said, and I believe he was disappointed that we had not been there to help. The fighting was pretty fierce for a few minutes. Then, very quickly, it began to let up and started drifting away from us, till we was standing in a quiet patch of woods, with nothing but the smell of the powder to remind us why we was there. Lieutenant Toms had us form a defensive line anyway, and we stayed like that in the empty woods, mostly watching Spirit chase after tossed sticks. Major Mitchell remembered us 3 hours later and sent word that we could come back in, which we did promptly. Lieutenant Tom saw me writing and asked to see it. He said I got it pretty much right, except that he had not been nervous and had not been thinking about Gettysburg at all, till the Major said what he said. He added that for someone who did not want to keep the company journal, I was certainly scribbling an awful lot down, so maybe I enjoyed this more than I let on. He is right about this last, anyway. November 7th. Received our orders this morning. Guard rear of supply train, etc., etc., and so forth. Lieutenant Toms accepted the orders as he always does, with a crisp salute to the delivering captain and a polite, "Yes, sir." When the captain was gone, Lieutenant Toms let out such a blast of cussing and yelling and stomping about that even the mule drivers nearby was greatly impressed. Heavy artillery duel way off and exchanges of musket fire. Some are in the middle of it today, but not us. The lieutenant said that when things are quiet, I am to write brief histories of each of the men. A battle is going on, but the supply wagons hardly move during a fight, so there is not much to do. The lieutenant also said I should start with myself, and I will do as ordered and be done with it. I have no recollection of my parents, not one, though Uncle often complained that the angel of death had freed them of their burden and saddled him with it instead, so I guess they both died of fever or some such. I was brought up by Uncle and Aunt. They did not like me using their given names, and so I don't. On their farm near the town of Warner's, which is not near anything at all, and my earliest recollection is of the clearing rocks from the field while Uncle plowed. "Prayer will bring you to heaven's path, and work will guide your footsteps," was a favorite phrase of Uncle, and he practiced what he preached 7 days a week, taking but a few minutes off to pray on the Sabbath. When we wasn't doing chores, I copied and read passages from the Bible, old newspapers, and the 3 books we had. Of my aunt, I do not remember much other than that she rarely left the house, rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice was as frail as a flower's petal, and seemed to be always nervous. I guess I would be there still, except that the rain did not fall as expected in the summer of 1862, and we seemed to produce more rocks than vegetables. Uncle began quoting the Bible more and more, and Aunt seemed even more uneasy, if that is possible, and both of them turned cold eyes on me as less and less food made its way to the table. They never did say it, but I think they blamed me for holding back the rain. Maybe they was right. I mean, I was bad luck for my parents, so who knows about such things. So one morning, to escape the stares, I went out and sat in the woods by the edge of the field. My thought was to join Uncle when he came out to work. Only a strange thing happened. As I sat there, Uncle and Aunt began doing their usual chores, milking the goat, feeding the few chickens left, repairing a broken fence, and so forth, and neither so much as looked up for me or called my name. All day I watched, and all day they went about their business. I was hungry at lunch, and hungrier still at supper, but I did not budge, and they did not call for me or in any way seem to miss me. Even then I kept hoping for some sort of sign from them. The sun went down, and a while after this the yellow light from the house candles was snuffed out, and it was clear they had gone to sleep, which was sign enough for me. So I started walking down the road, taking away the one burden of theirs that I could. I continued walking till the day, 3 months later, when I saw a call to a war meeting and signed on as part of G Company. And that is my story told in more words than it deserves. Later, a surprise. We was ordered forward in the afternoon to support the actions of the rest of the 122nd. Lieutenant Toms and some others looked happy with this, but I am not alone when I say that I was content to guard the supply train, as there is little to dodge back there but mule droppings. We was issued 3 days' rations and 40 rounds of ammunition, so we knew we would be very close to the fighting. Then off we marched, joining up with several other companies along the way. My knapsack never felt so heavy as on that short walk. We followed the road for 5 miles or so, but as we got close to the sounds of fighting, we went to the right and crossed a field with a sorry-looking farmhouse sitting in the middle. The owners, a sour old man and his sour old wife, stood in the doorway watching us file by. She was saying over and over, "Yank murderers, you'll burn in hell," though she changed it every so often to, "Thieving murderer Yanks, burn in hell, y'all." The man just glowered at us and spit wads of drippy brown tobacco juice in our direction. Charlie Shelp talked back to them mean, but such comes natural to Charlie. The rest of us was just happy to get to the woods, so those two ancients could not put the evil eye on our backs. I certainly did not need any more of that trailing after me. It didn't take long before I saw signs of the fight. Trees with their sides chewed at by musket balls, chunks of earth ripped up by 10-pound parrot shells. On a little, we passed some trees that had been cut in half, as if a giant clumsy hand had snapped off the tops and tossed them aside. Then we came to the first dead soldier, a Reb in a crisp new butternut uniform. He was sitting on the ground, leaning back against a tree, and seemed to be in a comfortable position with his eyes closed and his hands clasped together in his lap. Any other time I would have thought him asleep and dreaming of home and peach pie. But out here the thought does not scour. Besides, his face was already the color of yellow clay, and the front of his new uniform was stained dark with blood. "Shot through the heart clean," the little professor said as he stood over the body. "Dead since morning by his looks." "Not dead soon enough for me," Shelp added, and then he turned to me and said, "Hey, orphan boy, this one here looks like you. Got a calic the same as you too." And he was right. The dead soldier even looked to be my age, which did not help my confidence any. Move along, Lieutenant Toms ordered us. "There are plenty more rebels up ahead, and they'll be alive to shoot back." We didn't see any more bodies, ours or theirs, so I guess both sides had time to haul away their dead and wounded. Except the boy, that is. Up ahead was a wide open field where we formed a line of battle along one side after leaving our knapsacks and spirit in the care of Caesar. Across the field from us, maybe 300 yards away, was another thick, dark woods in which Rebs was supposed to be hiding. The field was pretty well churned up by their earlier fighting, with the stiff bodies of 15 or 20 horses and a lot of equipment scattered all about. So we stayed there, 500 soldiers shoulder to shoulder, with muskets cocked and at the ready, waiting and waiting for their charge. For the better part of the day, we was on that cold ground, muskets aimed at the invisible enemy, and listening to the real battle going on somewhere far away to our left. Some of the boys wanted to get the fight going and called out to the Rebs to come on and such, which is a silly thing to do as far as I am concerned. If a fight is going to happen, it will happen, and doesn't need me to hurry it along. It wasn't long before the cold got into my bones and set me off shivering, so I put my hands in my pockets and prayed that this would not mean another round of my ague. The last time I had those shivering night sweats, I thought I might die, I was so weak and tired. After the sun set, a courier appeared with fresh orders, and after a few minutes later, Lieutenant Tom said, "Okay, boys, we are going back." The Red Boy was still there, leaning back, and like a good soldier, waiting his turn to be collected. And the sour old man and the sour old woman were there waiting for us. Everybody waits in a war. November 8th. Today's orders. Guard the rear of the wagons. So I guess yesterday was a real emergency, and no one will have us yet. Lieutenant Toms did not get upset today, and he did not send Willie and Spirit out with his usual request. It would be kinder for them to shoot me and be done with it, he said quietly. And I think he meant it. He went on to say that he couldn't go home with this disgrace on his head, and since they wouldn't let him fight, he could never prove himself in battle. It did not help that Lieutenant Clapp from A Company visited this morning at breakfast and told Lieutenant Toms about the fighting they had done yesterday while we was guarding an empty field. Later, I asked Sergeant Donahue what I should write down as his history, and he gave me the queerest look. When I said it was an order from the lieutenant, he shook his head and said it was all nonsense, this writing down what happened and who was there and such. But then he said, "My father was in the regular army when I was born, and my mother and I, and later my two younger brothers, we all followed him when he moved from place to place. He was a cooper by trade, and a fine one too, but no one outside would hire the Irish. So that is how he came to the army. His name was Flan, and hers was Mary. Have you got all of this? Because I don't want to say it again. When I could, I joined the army, which is why I am here. Is that enough?" I said yes, and he walked away muttering, "Nonsense. That is all it is." And I was happy to have gotten what I did from him. I will add that the sergeant is married and has 3 children, all girls. I am still free of the ague, so I guess it has passed me by this time. November 9th. Much the same excitement as yesterday. Following the wagons. When we stopped, I was sent out with some of the others to watch for enemy raiders who might sneak up on our wagons. Spent most of the time wrapped up in my poncho facing away from an icy wind and thinking about that dead Reb boy. I wondered if he would get a proper burial, or whether he would just sit out there till some hungry pig found him. And I wondered if his friends missed him, or if his parents was somewhere thinking about him and worrying. Then I thought, at least he had someone to worry after him, which made the wind feel even sharper, and me feel very lonely indeed. 7 o'clock. Talk tonight at supper was about the elections and my curse. I am too young to vote, so I did not listen closely to what was said about the election. I do know that all who could voted against Copperhead candidates, who were for the secession of the South. My curse was another story. Most, the little professor among them, said such things do not exist, except in the mind of the unlucky, and Charlie Shelp added that I was as dumb as a fence post for believing such things. Everyone laughed at that, and I felt my face flush red. But Johnny Henderson jumped in then and said it was dangerous to make fun of a curse. He said his uncle once spit down a neighbor's well, and the next day his uncle drowned while fishing. He'd fished that pond for 30-40 years, Johnny said, but he put bad luck on himself by spitting down that well, and the water got him. Shelp said Johnny was as stupid as me, and that together we had as much sense as a drum. But I wasn't listening to Shelp. I was smiling at Johnny, because I knew he had made up the story so Shelp wouldn't pick on me alone. It didn't even bother me much when Shelp made up a song about me, and sang it over and over. "Good people, I will sing you a ditty, and I hope that it doesn't annoy. I make an appeal to your pity, for I'm an unfortunate boy. 'Twas under an unlucky planet that I was born one night. My life, since first I began it, has been cursed in dark and light. So do not make sport of my troubles, but pity one who feels no joy, for I am an uncomfortable, horrible, inconsolable Jonah boy." November 10th. Crossed the Rappahannock on a pontoon bridge at the tail end of the wagon train. Since there must be 500 wagons in the train, we did not get to cross it till it was nearly dark. It is a good thing we didn't have to wait for the cattle to cross too. Lieutenant Tom seems all in and is not his usual self, which might have something to do with the official report that was circulated yesterday. It congratulated the 122nd for charging and carrying a strong enemy position during the battle on the 7th, and for taking 1,600 prisoners, plus small arms and 3 cannons. It also said that Lieutenant Clapp had been promoted to the rank of captain because of his valor and leadership in the field. Some of the company have been trying to think of a way to cheer up Lieutenant Toms, but so far we have no good ideas. November 11th. Today the trampling of thousands of cavalry horses, followed by tens of thousands of foot soldiers, followed by thousands of mules and hundreds of wagons, churned the road into a mud pike. Spent too much time hauling stuck wagons from the thick soup. At one point we came to a wagon whose 6 mules had gotten tired and stopped to rest. The driver was heaping one cuss after another on them, along with some fierce blows from his whip, but they just stood there with heads bowed. Willie, who has a tender spot for all dumb creatures, not just three-legged ones, told the driver to stop what he was doing, which the driver did, but only so he could turn his mortar gun mouth on Willie and the rest of us nearby. While the driver's back was turned, the mules ended their rest break and began walking forward very slowly. The driver never even heard them, not with his mouth firing cusses, Willie answering back and Spirit dancing around barking. And of course no one, not even his fellow drivers, bothered to tell him what was happening. It wasn't till an officer from the supply train asked the driver where his wagon was that he realized it was gone. At least 20 wagons had already passed by, so the driver raced off after his own, slipping and sliding in the mud while throwing more curses back at us. It was a fine spectacle to watch and gave the boys a needed laugh. Several of the boys are sick with the ague and flux and had to report to the doctors, but so far I am fine. There is a rumor that the paymaster is near, and this has raised the hopes of some, including me, who wish to visit the sutler for supplies. We have had nothing but shelled corn, a little meat, hardtack, and coffee for 3 days now. Later. Lieutenant Toms was very quiet today, and no one bothered him with talk. So when Henry Wyatt wanted to know where he was headed, he asked his brother James, Henry being shy always. James asked Corporal Bell, who asked Sergeant Donahue, who, after some thought and hesitation, went to Lieutenant Toms and stated Henry's question. "Where are we going?" Lieutenant Toms shouted. "How in the name of hell would I know? They don't tell me anything any more. The damn mules know more than I do. Ask them." Lieutenant Toms fell quiet again, and Sergeant Donahue came over to us and said we could ask our own damn questions after this. The rumor about the paymaster turned out to be just that. No pay. No trip to the sutler. November 12th. We are headed for Brandy Station, where the army will spend the winter. This information was gotten from one of the mule drivers. Johnny Henderson thinks this is about as close to actually talking to a mule as you can get, a mule being a rather more reliable source of information than a driver. The rest of the day had us marching, hauling stuck wagons, marching, hauling, and a sorry muddy bunch we were by night. I have a case of the shakes, which may be the ague or something worse, and have been having trouble sleeping. I have also had a hard time forgetting that dead Reb boy. I am going to take quinine and hope this will drive off the ague and the boy.